The book we are reading is Classic Starts, Pinocchio, a Carlo Collodi original, retold by Tanya Zamorsky. This is Chapter 17 and 18. Chapter 17, Pinocchio Finds His Father. Pinocchio walked for what felt like miles to get to the source of the light. Finally he found it, and you can guess what it was. A candle stuck in a glass bottle, sitting on a table. At a table sat not a fish, but a little old man munching on something. Pinocchio squinted and looked closer. Wait, could it possibly be? He wanted to laugh, he wanted to cry, he wanted to say 1,001 things, but all he could do was stand still, stuttering and stammering brokenly. At last, with great effort, he opened his arms wide and ran, pushed to embrace the little old man. "Father, I have found you at last!" The old man rubbed his eyes. "Could it possibly be?" he stammered and blinked. "Are you really my dear little Pinocchio?" Pinocchio assured him that indeed he was. Sitting on his father's lap, he then proceeded to tell him, in an excited rush, everything that had happened to him since they had parted ways. "I saw you when you swam out to reach me," Geppetto exclaimed, "but I couldn't get the boat back to shore. The waves were so rough, and then the terrible shark came and swallowed me." "And here you have been in the shark's stomach for these past 2 years?" Pinocchio asked, amazed. "How have you survived?" Geppetto explained that the shark had also swallowed a large sunken ship, free of sailors, but loaded with meat, canned goods, crackers and raisins, cheese, coffee, sugar, candles, and matches. "Unfortunately," Geppetto said, "I am down to my final crumbs and my very last candle. And then, my son, we shall find ourselves sitting in darkness." "Then there is no time to lose," Pinocchio cried. "We must try to escape." Pinocchio suggested they run out of the shark's mouth and dive into the sea, but Geppetto, like the tunny, was scared and unsure. "I can't swim," he added. "Well, I can," Pinocchio replied. "I will carry you on my shoulders. Don't be afraid. Come on." Father and son walked a long way through the stomach and the whole body of the shark. When they reached the throat, they stopped and hid behind a tonsil, waiting for just the right moment to make their move. That poor old asthmatic shark slept with his mouth open in order to breathe. Pinocchio could look out and see the starry sky. Grabbing Geppetto's hand, Pinocchio whispered, "Now." The two climbed up the throat, walking carefully on their tiptoes across the shark's thick, spongy tongue, trying not to tickle him. But tickle him they must have, for at that moment the shark gave a terrible wheeze, violently sucking them back down into his stomach. To make matters worse, the candle had now gone out, and the two were left in darkness. "Oh well," Geppetto said, "we tried." "And we will try again," Pinocchio vowed. "Give me your hand, dear father, and don't be scared." With these words, Pinocchio led his father back up the throat, across the tongue, and carefully over 3 rows of teeth. At the edge of the shark's mouth, Pinocchio told his father to climb aboard. With Geppetto seated comfortably on his shoulders, Pinocchio did a swan dive into the ocean and began to swim. The sea was smooth, and the moon lit their way. Finally they were free, reunited, and headed home. Everything seemed fine until Pinocchio noticed his father was shivering violently in the cold water. "Hang in there," Pinocchio said. "We're almost at the shore." Geppetto weakly lifted up his head and said, "I see nothing but sea and sky." Pinocchio had to admit that his father was right, and he himself was getting weak and starting to shiver from the cold of the water. Still he tried to comfort the old man. "I see it," he lied, and this time, perhaps because his lie was for a very good cause, his nose stayed put. Pinocchio continued to try his best. Soon, however, he could not fake it any longer. He was exhausted too. It was over. "I'm so sorry, father," he whispered, his head just barely above the water, and father and son started to sink. Just then a gravelly voice called out from the water beneath them. "What's the trouble?" A head popped up, and wouldn't you know it, it was the tunny fish that had been with them in the terrible shark's stomach. "Tunny?" Pinocchio asked. "How did you escape? I thought you had given up." "I had," the tunny said, "but then I decided to be brave. I followed you. You saved my life, and now I shall save yours. Climb aboard my back, and I shall soon have you safely to shore." "Are we too heavy?" asked Pinocchio once they were aboard. "You're as light as seashells," answered the fish, and in just a few seconds they had reached the shore. After thanking the tunny and wishing him well, Geppetto and Pinocchio began to walk. Almost immediately they came upon 2 rough-looking characters. It took Pinocchio a second, but eventually he realized it was Fox and Cat. After pretending to be blind for so many years, Cat had now really lost sight in both of his eyes, and Fox, old, thin, and almost hairless, had been forced to sell his fancy bushy tail for some bread. They were pathetic. "Help us, Pinocchio," they begged. "Give us something." This time, however, Pinocchio was not fooled by these false friends. He gave them only some priceless advice. "Remember," he said, "money, and especially stolen money, never bears fruit in the field of wonders or anywhere else." "That's it?" Cat asked. "That's all you're going to give us?" "That's more than you deserve," Pinocchio said, and he and Geppetto continued on their way. They soon came upon a tiny cottage built of straw, and they knocked on the door. "Who is it?" said a little voice from inside. "A poor father and a poorer son," they replied, "nearly drowned and now starving and without shelter." "Come in," the little voice cried. Geppetto and Pinocchio entered. They looked high and low, but saw no one there. "I'm up here," the voice cried from above. There on a beam sat Cricket. "Dear Cricket," Pinocchio cried happily. "Oh, now you call me your dear Cricket, but do you remember when you threw your hammer at me and ignored my warnings?" "I am so sorry," Pinocchio replied. "You're right. You've always been right. I don't deserve your forgiveness, but help my poor father, won't you?" Cricket smiled. "I will help you both," he said. "I only wanted to remind you that in this world we must treat each other the way we wish to be treated." Chapter 18. Pinocchio Becomes a Boy. When Pinocchio and Geppetto were settled, Cricket revealed that the cottage had been given to him only yesterday by a little goat with blue hair. "She handed me the keys and went away, bleating sadly. Poor Pinocchio," she said, "I will never see him again." "So the little blue goat on the white rock, the one who witnessed me being swallowed by the shark, really was Fairy?" Pinocchio cried. But where was she now? Still out there, stuck in the middle of the sea? If he wasn't certain that her magic would help her to save herself, he would try to save her too. But now he had his father to take care of. Pinocchio carefully made his father a bed of straw and helped the old man lie down. The next step was to get him some nourishment. "Where can I find some milk?" Pinocchio asked Cricket. "3 fields away from here lives Farmer John. He has some cows. Go there and he will give you what you want." Pinocchio ran all the way there, but the farmer wouldn't give him a glass of milk unless Pinocchio gave him a penny. "I have no penny," Pinocchio said sadly. "Well, then you'll get no milk." Pinocchio turned to go. "Wait a moment," said Farmer John. "Perhaps we can work out a trade. Can you draw water from a well?" This time Pinocchio didn't protest. He was a changed puppet. "I can try," he said. "Then go to that well you see there and draw me 100 bucketfuls of water." Pinocchio did just that, and 100 bucketfuls later he had a warm glass of fresh milk for his father. He had never worked so hard in his life. From that day on, Pinocchio got up every morning before the sun rose and went to the farm to draw water for the farmer, and every day the farmer gave him a glass of warm milk for his poor old father in return. Geppetto grew stronger and better every day. But that wasn't all. Pinocchio also took on lots of other little jobs. He helped people with their chores, he made things and sold them, and with the money he received, he and his father were able to keep from starving. In the evenings, Pinocchio studied by candlelight from an old second-hand schoolwork book that he had bought all by himself with some of the money he had earned. Before long, he was able to save 50 whole pennies. He decided he would buy a new suit. His was full of holes and held together with tape. On the way to the market, Pinocchio ran into an old friend. Why, it was the snail that had lived with Fairy. "Answer me quickly, sweet but slow snail," he cried. "Where and how is Fairy?" The snail replied, "Fairy is lying sick in the hospital. She doesn't even have 1 penny with which to buy a bite of bread." Pinocchio gasped. Reaching into his pockets, he pulled out his pennies and begged the snail to take them all. He didn't need a new suit. He would give anything he had to help Fairy. "If you come back in a few days," he added, "I will have even more money to give you." Inspired by Pinocchio's kindness and generosity, the snail, quite against her normal habit, began to run like a lizard under the hot summer sun. "Where is your new suit?" Geppetto asked when Pinocchio returned. "Oh, I decided I didn't really need one after all," Pinocchio replied. That day, instead of making 8 baskets to sell at the market, Pinocchio made 16. It was almost midnight when he had finished, and he fell quickly into a deep sleep. That night he dreamed that a beautiful, happy, healthy fairy kissed him and forgave him. In return for his kindness, and because he had taken care of his father, she promised to give him the thing that he had always wanted most. Awakening and opening his eyes, Pinocchio was stunned to realize that the dream had been real. Instead of being a puppet made of wood, he was finally a real flesh and blood boy. And that wasn't all. Looking around, he found a little straw cottage gone. In its place was a big bed in a comfortable room in a real house. Jumping down from the bed, Pinocchio saw a new suit, a new hat, and a shiny pair of shoes laid out on a chair. On the dresser was a note and a leather purse. The note read, "Boys with such kind hearts deserve to keep their pennies. Fairy." Opening the purse, Pinocchio found 50 pennies. Running to the mirror, Pinocchio could hardly recognize himself. In the glass was a tall boy with bright blue eyes, dark brown hair, and a happy, smiling mouth. Why, he was downright handsome. Pinocchio ran into his father's room, where he found a man who had much changed. Several years younger and looking snazzy in new clothes, he was once again Master Geppetto, the woodcarver, already hard at work on his latest craft project. "How did this happen?" the boy asked in wonder. "You made it happen," Geppetto replied. "When bad boys become good and kind, magic happens." "And what happened to the poor naughty old puppet Pinocchio?" "There he is," answered Geppetto, and he pointed to a large puppet leaning against a chair. The puppet's head was turned to one side, his arms hung limp, and his legs were twisted under him. Taking one last long look at his old life, Pinocchio sighed contentedly. "How silly I was," he said, "and how happy I am now that I am a real boy." And that, my dear readers, was no lie. And that concludes Chapter 18 of Pinocchio. We hope you're enjoying our chapter a week story. Call again every week for a new chapter.